I'd like to call to order this study session of the Albion City Council. I remind you all to please turn off your cell phones or silence them during the meeting. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Barnes.
Here.
Reed.
Here.
Brown.
Here.
Lawler.
Here.
Spicer. Here. French.
Here.
And Mayor Brown.
At this time, we'll take public comments. Persons addressing the City Council shall limit their comments to agenda items only and to no more than 3 minutes. Proper decorum is required. Do we have any public comments this evening?
Come on, what member?
Seeing none, we'll move on to items for individual discussion. Council goal setting session. So this is the second part of our goal setting session. I'm going to ask Interim City Manager Kip to just kind of bring us up to speed and where we are tonight so we know what we need to do moving forward.
Well, we had the discussion over the goals at the first meeting, which is listed on the back of the agenda you have in front of you, I believe. And the 7 items that you identified as the items of interest in goal setting were there. I think what the plan tonight had been was to make a more complex list of exactly where we want to go with these items. So,
okay. Thank you. So does everyone have their list? Just making sure.
one of the things I did ask a couple of the staff members to be here because of some of the millage things that we were discussing, as well as it wasn't specifically put in the goals, but I think the recreation millage is probably part of that as well. And so hopefully we can have a discussion of that tonight and have a better idea where we want to go at the next meeting, because we need to get this taken care of quickly.
Councilmember French.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Given that some of these require a conversation about millages, maybe we should do that first. I feel without our mayor, we get to have these conversations, but we'd like to have his input as well. But I mentioned at the last meeting that I thought it would be useful to have some numbers regarding a 0.5% increase in our recreation millage from 1.5 points to 2 mills. And so I thank you for this. I wonder if we could talk to somebody about this, whether it's Tom or others. One of the things that struck me as I look at this right now is adding of a 0.5 mil looks like we're no longer, we're basically replacing, plus a little bit, a Cronin grant that goes away. So my question is, would we anticipate asking for Cronin for funding again, rather than just using a millage to replace the grant?
Sorry, just did you have a question, or did you want me to?
I did. I was just wondering, can we do that? Are we deviating from the agenda here? Can we, study session, can we talk about the millage? Or do we need to make a motion to, can we do that?
Councilmember French.
I would say that because this is council goal setting session, that's a vague enough item for discussion. We have neighborhood stabilization. And so neighborhood stabilization is not just necessarily roads, streets, and sidewalks, but involves social programming as well. So I feel like talking about the recreation department fits into that neighborhood stabilization. But of course, I will defer to others.
Well, nothing here stops you from adding goals to the goals that you've already set as well. So if this is a goal council wants to add, they could add that to this as well, because the agenda item itself is merely goal setting. So. Okay,
so I don't have a problem adding this as a goal. If the recreation millage, is that the only millage that we need that you see?
Well, there was discussion of infrastructure between streets, sidewalks, and water and sewage.
Oh, right.
All of those involve millages as well, whether we want to raise millages for those things. Also, we have to discuss water rates and sewer rates, which are a matter of a need of increase, especially if we're going to request grants for water towers and such. So.
Okay, so let me say this. I know the recreation millage is something that we talked about at a prior meeting. We have information tonight, which is great. We can discuss it. I guess I want to be clear that we're going to add this as a goal under one of the proposed millages, correct? So I just want to list these: recreation, the street, sidewalks, waters, and sewer, because those are the potential.
Yep, number
millages.
2. That's number 2.
Right.
So, yep.
Okay, sorry. I'm sorry. Councilmember French?
Sorry, thank you. I apologize, what I was hoping we'd have a chance to do is talk about the recreation fund in general. And now that we have data about a millage, we can talk about what an increase would look like. I think that and I thank Tom for being here, so if you could.
Good evening, Tom Mead, Finance Director. And as Councilmember French mentioned, when you look at this, well, let me back up a little bit, I guess. So what I tried to do is I took the budget the council, you guys approved for 2018 for recreation, and I laid that down, and then beside it, I put what we would anticipate the budget to look like in 19, with everything else remaining the same, but just increasing the recreation millage by $0.50 So it will go from 1.5, which it currently is, to 2 mils. Having said that, the other piece of the puzzle that varies is that Cronin grant money. And in my conversation, I'm not familiar with the background of that or the discussions, but in my discussion with Larry Williams today, he said that because there was recognition that the rec department could not afford that $25,000 in 17, they agreed to grant that, or to award them that Cronin grant to cover the cost of their rental of the school property. Oh. And then knowing, now this is Larry's understanding, question?
Yes. Could you specify the $25,000? What is that for? Is that the leasing space at the Opportunity School?
Yes, at the school, exactly. And with their knowledge that the new millage, or the opportunity to go to the citizens to vote for a new millage wouldn't take effect until 2019, Larry felt pretty confident that we could approach them again for the grant for 18. So that's why we put it in the budget. After that, there was no guarantee. That their anticipation was that we could maybe go to the voters and get the extra $0.25 or $0.50 there. So that's kind of the history of that as I know it. And yes, to answer your question, a $0.25 wouldn't quite cover it. A $0.50 will cover it, and then actually even provide a little extra. I don't know how I can go down through this in detail if you want, or we can just kind of skim across, but basically by adding the $0.50, keeping everything else the same except for the Cronin grant, we would anticipate coming out, I set it to where we'd come out about the same in profitability at the end of the year. However, the big difference, if you go back up to the second page, is in the program fees, the program expenses. We would, 2 things there. Number one, we have really cut that down to where they haven't been able to do a lot of stuff. We've had it down to $7,500 a year, and I think he spent about $6,800 in 17. Like I said, it's really tight budget for him to work on. I bumped it up with the $0.50. We bumped it up to $20,000. So going from $7,500 up to $20,000 which obviously would give him considerably more money to work with for doing programs. Also, and I don't know, this is totally up to you guys, I don't know the history, I guess, of negotiation with the senior center, but it's been at $8,700 for quite a while, a number of years. This would allow us to potentially offer to maybe give them a little more. Again, that's just, you know, it helped them out, I guess, a little bit, but that's up to the council, and I don't know, again, what the agreement was with the senior center, but I know the millage did specify that we would contribute some of it to the senior center, so. So anyway, yeah, with the $500,000, it would help him out tremendously, so. Questions on, yeah.
Yes, I do have a question. Thank you. So the $25,000 agreement with the Marshall Opportunity High School, is it possible that that amount could increase in 2019, or is that just a standing flat rate that's guaranteed to stay the same year after year after year?
That's a very good question, and one that I do not know the answer to. I wasn't involved in I don't know.
I really haven't answered that either directly. I would not expect them to increase that on us. Of course, if their operating expenses exceed theirs, they obviously could do that, but at this time, I haven't heard any discussion of that changing.
One comment that Director Williams made on in the conversation about it, he said in talking to Dr. Davis at Marshall Public Schools, there was, not sure exactly how he worded it, but there was a comment that it is not their goal to make it to where it's you know, too much a burden or to where they cannot afford to be there. So I think they would be reasonable working with us.
Go ahead. Councilmember French.
Okay. Yeah, so I see that we've increased by, you know, $12,000, $13,000, $14,000 for program expenses, either through the senior center or for program expenses. And so I think that, you know, that's a little flexible, right? So if we were to, if they were to say increase the rent from 25 to 30, that still doubles the program expenses from 7,500 to 15. So I think that, but I think you're right. I think that would be certainly negotiable. I think that the Opportunity High School and Marshall Public Schools wants people in the building using the pool and using the facilities, and I think it's a good marriage. So I don't think I think that's something we can go to Randy Davis and say, we're not asking money from the Program Foundation. We're adding a mill to our property taxes, and
right.
And so I think that's likely to happen. So.
And $25,000 for a pool and a gymnasium is pretty cheap.
Yes. Yes, it is.
And I don't know if you noticed too on the subsequent pages there when he provided us kind of a summary of all the activities that they are providing, and which he did say that he has had to alter a lot. He's trying to do programs that don't cost a lot of money, basically, because when they get done, the net, he doesn't want to be, you know, in the hole very much, so he's trying to do ones that kind of pay for themselves or break even or so. But he did say, or as you can see, the aqua aerobics, I guess it's called, has been a very popular thing with seniors in particular, but I think all ages as well. So.
Yeah. So with negotiating this agreement, because from what I'm hearing, it's important to consider this millage in order to continue to be able to afford to lease out the space. Okay.
Yep. So
with negotiating this, who were you currently at a meeting? No. Was there a meeting to discuss any?
No. Jill can probably tell you better with the ballot language when it has to be completed by
May 15th.
Yep. So May 15th.
The language?
We have to have it
into the county
into the
by 4 o'clock on the 15th. In order to
Pretty
go
tight
to
window.
August ballot.
That's pretty soon.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's why we wanted to have this discussion tonight and not next meeting.
Surprise. Okay. So I'm just going to say this because it's on my mind, and I'm learning how to be more freely with what I'm thinking. I don't mind considering this. I think we should set it as a goal that the council should consider which millages to put on the ballot in August. I know that Mr. Williams is the director of the Recreation Department. I also know he is a member of the Marshall School Board. So I say that to say, and I know he had that position before he was appointed, and that's fine. I'm all in support of Albion representation on that board. However, for the sake of this negotiation, I would just ask that I don't know if Mr. Williams has been in those discussions or not as the Albion Rec Director, but if so, I would ask that we be very mindful of that and not to.
Yeah. There actually have been no meetings regarding this. This is a council decision to make whether we do these.
Well, there's been discussion, not to cut you off. There's been discussion, obviously, because it's before us, right?
Well,
So-
this discussion is between myself and Tom as the finance director with the money that we have to spend.
Okay.
And so it's a matter of whether or not we want to increase this to 1.5 mils or even, to 2 mils from the 1.5, or to even put it on the ballot at all, which is really up to council to decide at that point. We were just trying to give you the numbers, and this is what Garrett, or the mayor had asked for. And so I just thought it would be a good night to have this as a discussion. So.
Right, which is fine. I'm not opposed to that, but again, I want to be mindful of
Yep.
that. Councilmember French, and then Councilmember Spicer.
Thank you. I would agree. I think that we're entering a relationship between the city of Albion and the Marshall Public Schools. So I would argue that the negotiation happens at the city manager level.
It needs to.
Not necessarily at the director level.
Right.
Or with Tom.
Right. Well, and I can tell you, the conversations I've had have been with Tom. Now, Tom has had conversations with Larry, but the conversations about the millage have been directly between me and Tom, and I have not spoken with Larry at all, so.
Okay.
Right.
Councilmember Spicer.
Thank you. I think you covered my comment, but let me ask if this goes on this is approved by council to go on the ballot in August. That means the citizens of Albion would have to approve this increase. If they did not, it would remain the same. It would go away completely.
Well, and that's the other part of the discussion we probably need to have, is that we can do this a couple different ways, I believe, which is we can ask for a renewal of the 1.5 mils by itself, and then we could ask for a 0.5 mil increase separately, or we could ask for the 2 mils as a whole as one request, which, if that gets turned down, we have no money for the recreation department. But we also are probably less likely to get a 0.5 mil increase if we ask for it separately.
Right.
So it's kind of, yeah, right.
To jump in on how it's worded, it actually is a little tricky, and Jill just pointed out something to me today on the wording we were looking at in Michigan Common Law. I can't remember what it was, didn't bring it with me, but it actually looks like it said you shall not ask it on one question if the new money exceeds 0.5 mil, I think is how it's worded. So we kind of seen that, took it that, oh, maybe we can just present it as one, but yet I gotta believe that they would require some clarity that what's the renewal portion versus what's the increase. So I don't know how exactly it would be worded.
So I'm thinking, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Councilmember.
I was just wanting to clarify what he said because his voice was going. Can you repeat that? Are you saying we can ask for the increase in the same question language with the?
When I first read the information was sent to me by Equalization, it appeared that I thought we'd have to do it in two separate questions on the ballot. In reading it closer today, it appeared to have a 0.5 mil threshold, to where if you're not asking for more than a 0.5 mil of new money, it appeared that you could do it all in one question. But I would think that question would have to be carefully worded to make it clear what's renewal and what's new, or what the increase, I would think.
Well, wow. So I know we have a council meeting coming up May 7th that we'll have to make a decision. But for the sake of goal setting tonight, I think that it's my suggestion that we set the goal that council decides whether or not to seek this millage as a goal, and that'll be measured by the vote that we take. Councilmember Spicer.
Thank you. Can we also get a draft of some sample language, like what you said you thought could be in one question that could encompass the current mill plus the increase, as well as some drafts of some language so that we could have something to look at that would be acceptable to the county. Is that right, county?
Correct. Well, yeah, county first, but does it have to go to the state as well, or just county?
Okay.
Well, and I think by the next meeting, we'll have that language spelled out a couple different ways, and that way you'll have the opportunity to approve the one that you want to approve. So,
Councilmember Councilmember Lawler, and then if you wanted to.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I just agree with Councilmember Spicer because I don't want it to be tricky.
Right,
So,
I agree.
Yes, I agree with her.
And I forgot what I was going to ask. Sorry.
So I do have a question. So the proposed millages that we're going to talk about considering as far as street, sidewalks, water, and sewer, is that language also due in May to be on the August ballot, or are those things not as pressing as this recreation? It's due the same time?
well, it could go on the November ballot if we chose to do that, but, right. Yeah, so, yeah,
Which would be August.
Which
You'd
would
have
be-
to have the
right.
language in by August.
So I guess my question, okay. My question is, we're looking at potentially putting this recreation millage language on an August ballot, right?
Yep.
It will not the money won't kick in until 2019.
Correct.
So if we wait till November, why wouldn't we wait till November?
The only thing I think traditionally, and this is my opinion, I am no expert on it, but I think traditionally we've looked at August on these type of renewals or city millages only with the idea that if it should fail, we could hurry and get something ready to get to the county in August then to bring it back to the ballot in November. And that way, that would give us a second chance before the millage actually expired. Once it expires, then the whole thing is considered new. So if we waited till May of 19 election, which would have to be a special election, it would be all new money because it would have expired at the end of 18.
Okay. Councilmember French?
Yeah, thank you. I would also add that because we're having a primary in August, it doesn't cost us anything. And we can do some marketing in the summer, but a lot of people are gone or not thinking about it, so we get that second chance for November. It also, I think, gives us a chance as we plan budgetarily, right? Let's say it fails in November. We have no recourse to have a rec department starting in January, whereas if it fails in August, we can do two things. We can plan for not having that millage, and can we find money to keep the rec department alive, so that when we approve the budget in December, it's there, we have months to plan, but it also gives us a chance to do better marketing to help make that a yes vote in November.
Okay. So that makes sense to me. I have one last thought / question. We're looking at potentially putting a millage before voters in August. And then with the street, sidewalks, water and sewer, we could potentially be asking again in November. Now, to the average voter who's not, that looks like we're asking for back-to-back, like, okay, now you want more money, what is the city doing, look at our street, you get that whole reaction. So I'm thinking it may be best to just maybe do it all on one.
Well, in part of the discussion on the millages. The water and sewer would actually be just rate increases that are set by council. That's not actually a millage. The street and sidewalks would be a millage. This is the only renewal millage I believe. Right. The other ones would be new millages that we'd be asking for. And I also am not sure necessarily that in this goal setting that these were necessarily 2018 goals. Rather, they may be looking at 2019 or 2020 even, as far as where we're going to go with these in the future. So,
okay, that's fair.
So I'm not sure that's what we're discussing with the other ones.
Well, okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Is there any more questions or comments from council regarding this recreation? Councilmember Spicer.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I'd just like to say that I understand that the Recreation Department provides an invaluable service to the residents of Albion, our children as well. And I certainly would not want to see that not happen. So I think if we could do the millage for them separate and apart from any millage that we may have with regard to the street and sidewalk, it might be, you know, we might be able to pass it that way. But I think if you're asking for them both at the same time, that could be something people, many citizens might frown upon. So, and the other thing too is I know that we have to have the deadline is May 15th.
15th, yeah.
So that means that we have to have draft language by the next meeting, which is
7. Yeah.
Is that going to give us sufficient time to make the May 15th?
I think so.
So decide, or?
Yeah, that language isn't very difficult to put together.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from council?
And
Yes,
if I could add one final thought on this that will help, hopefully. If you recall, historically, we've had a debt millage. That debt, good news here, that debt actually paid off in 17. Fall of 17, we made our final payment on that. We set that millage. That millage can fluctuate a little bit because it just has to be set high enough to cover the debt payment. Being the final year, that payment wasn't as large. So in 17, that mill was dropped to just 1 mil on your tax bill. But in 18, that's 1 mil that'll be gone. So in your total millages in 18, you're going to be down 1 mil. So then if we come back in 19, adding a half, for example, for the recreation, you're still down a half from where we were in 17, if that makes sense.
And where were we prior to that? Like in 2016?
I think in 16 it was like 1.58, and I don't know if it ever hit 2, but it seemed to bounce around kind of between, for that particular millage, debt service millage.
Councilmember Spicer.
Thank you. So how does the sidewalk assessment fee, that has went away, am I correct?
Exactly, yep.
So then that is money that people, property owners have in their pocket?
Correct. That would be an additional $50 less on the bill.
On the bill, gotcha.
Yep.
Thank you.
Tom, can you speak to about how much 1 mil would be on a $50,000, $100,000 house?
Oh, you're going to ask that, and I had that sheet and I forgot and left it downstairs. But I'll go by memory. I think it would come in at about 80-some thousand for 1 mil. I think half a mil was 43, 1 was 86. And that, when I throw those numbers, it gets kind of confusing too, because you got to remember you have capture, you know, TIFA, DA, and then you also have some that are delinquent and are unpaid. And yes, the county will settle with us later, but it's in the following year, and it will kind of catch up in a way, but yet then if they don't sell the property, then we get a charge back, et cetera. So when I say 1 mil, roughly 86,000, you got to take probably, I don't know, I'm going to say 12,000 off that for potential capture and delinquencies.
How much is that to the homeowner of like a $100,000 house? Do you know?
Well, I did it. The calculation I did was if you had a 100,000, if your house had a market value of 100,000, that would equate to a taxable value on your bill of 50, and so that would come out to about $50.
Okay, so 1 mil is gonna be about $50 for a $100,000 house, and
Yep.
you calculate it from there.
And I think the half a mil, we're talking 25 extra, roughly. If you bumped it up a half a mil, assuming your house was worth 100, which meant taxable of 50, it'd be about $25 more a year.
Right.
Thank you. Any, Councilmember Barnes?
Tom, that's based on $1 per $1,000 property value, right?
Correct. You'd take your taxable value, divide it by 1,000, times about millage rate.
Any other council member questions or comments before we move on? Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm thinking, well, we know that council, we need to make a decision as far as the millages and stuff, and the recreation millage will be addressed at the May 7th meeting.
Well, and I'm assuming the council wants us to move forward with that language so that you have a chance to approve that at the meeting, so.
Well, yeah,
Okay.
yes.
So, yeah. That's really what I was looking for tonight, was to
Okay.
just move that way.
Okay. Okay, so since we're talking about potential millages, I'm suggesting that we move and talk about streets and sidewalks and then water and sewer. The sidewalk assessment, I know Councilmember Spicer mentioned, that's done with. So we need to, go ahead.
Jim, can you speak to the water and sewer rates first, which are probably more important initially,
Right, because we have the water.
before we start talking about other things we can
That's
spend money
fine.
on?
That's fine. That's fine.
Trying to get the simple.
Right. Well, this is simple, but yeah.
Jim Leonardson, Public Services Director. Currently, with the SAW grant, we are in the stages of wrapping up what we feel is the sewer rate study, and hopefully we'll have some numbers before long to bring to council for a recommendation. As part of the USDA rural development grant application, we've also are in the process of doing a water rate study. I actually talked with Mickey Bittner today. We're in the final stages of that grant application, and we're down to getting that water rate together. So hopefully there again, we will have something to offer, bring to council, a recommendation in the near future. Go ahead.
So what is the deadline for, I want to make sure I remember this. As part of the SAW grant, we learned that our water rates are like extremely low compared to other communities, correct?
Correct.
So we're being encouraged in order to qualify for the SAW grant to adjust our rates to, they'll increase to be at a rate that's comparable with other communities. Is that my understanding that correctly?
What we need to establish is an operating budget, obviously, and a reserve fund so that we can take care of what we have out there, the infrastructure that's in the ground or wherever it may be, at the wastewater plant, et cetera. And that will all, as I say, that should come hopefully before much longer. We have crunched some numbers on it. We're trying to add in some other numbers to figure out how we can make it work. But yes, basically, that's what it'll provide in the end is what we need to operate on, as well as a reserve fund for repairs, replacement, et cetera.
So when is this due?
When is it due?
Yes.
The SAW grant is basically wrapped up, but we're continuing to get all the pieces put together.
Right.
And that's part of it. We have looked at some options. Basically, it's a matter of sitting down again, I think, and crunching more numbers so that we can bring you a finalized number.
And where I think it's going to really come into play is when we start asking for grants, whether it's to build a new water tower or other projects, they're going to require us to have rates that are at a certain level in order for us to provide those grants. Otherwise, we're going to be looking at doing those all on our own without getting the grant money that we're requesting. So,
Exactly.
and I think if I remember or understood this right, one of the things that the council needs to consider is the rate increases and how we're going to go about doing those, rather than a large increase at one time, smaller increments over the next couple of years possibly. And so I think it's important for council to consider those things. And obviously we don't have the numbers just yet, but as a goal setting, when you start talking about adding increases to millages, you've got these other rates that people are going to have to also absorb. And so we're asking for a lot that we've kind of ignored for years. So.
Exactly.
Did you have your hand up? Okay. Okay. Any council member questions, comments? Council member French?
Thank you. So we also have aged infrastructure. We're hoping over time to be able to get money or spend money on road rebuild. And there's an opportunity there to address the water mains that are now held together in many spaces with clamps.
Correct.
And so, so I think that we need to do a better job, I think, of communicating to our citizens that the rate increase allows us to be a sustainable operation, that over a period of decades, the infrastructure in the ground, the water mains that are 50, 60 years old, the sewer pipes that are just as old, can over time, as a road gets decided, we're going to rebuild 2nd Street. While we're rebuilding that road, we're also going to replace the water mains and the sewer. And so having that, those resources are vital. So even as we think about the water tower over the immediate need to build a $1 million, million-gallon, $3 million water tower, we can also think about, you know, every citizen over time is going to get attention to their water main and their sewer line.
Exactly. And that's how a good street project could go, or should go. How many of you have driven around after we just done a street, and unfortunately the infrastructure that lays below, we haven't had the money to take care of, and within about a month, usually to 6 months, we're out there digging up that new street, because when they put that new street in, the construction equipment will obviously do damage to that infrastructure down below, so now we have a patch in our new street.
Yeah.
So technically, that's what we should be doing, is water and sewer at the same time we're doing a street project. Yes, it's more costly, but if in fact we get these rates sets where we need them to be, over time we'll have that abundancy in the fund balance to be able to do that as we go along.
And towards that end, we got a call a couple days ago from the MEDC, who have asked us to reapply for the ICE grant that they turned us down on, with the understanding, I believe, that we are probably going to get that. And so that will result in all of that water being done on Irwin Avenue along with the entire road. So
That'll be a complete
yeah.
Irwin Avenue
Yep.
job from Superior Street all the way to Finley Drive. To include water and sewer.
I can't say we don't have it yet, but
Right.
with the phone call, I believe we're probably looking at getting it. So
It sounds really good for us. It really does.
And that'll be a 2019 project. So.
And it's about $2.2 million, of which potentially we could get up to $2 million out of that. So we're looking at $300,000.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that makes me very happy.
I told the previous city manager it helps that the city manager carries a gun. It, gets a little more time.
That's definitely good news, to receive a call telling you to reapply for that is very encouraging, so good news.
I see new water tower on the agenda for tonight. Do you want to
Number 7,
move
yes,
that up
sure,
with
up here.
infrastructure? Again, as I say, we're really close to being able to have the USDA Rural Development Grant application submitted. We're in the final stages of that with the rate study that we're doing on the drinking water side. Hopefully, within the next couple of weeks, we'll be able to wrap that up and get that submitted. So, other than that, until we hear back from the USDA, it's kind of in limbo. I will say also, with the current tower, we're probably looking, as I understand it, mid to late May before they're going to get started on it. I haven't heard anything official yet, but that's what I'm hearing through the engineering firm. So,
You're talking about the paint,
yeah, the current tower.
you
that
said
rehab.
mid to late May?
Probably
Okay.
be mid to late May is what I'm being told. I haven't had any firm information, but that's kind of what they're looking at.
Okay.
So,
I think our weather slowed them down just a little.
Yeah. Any questions, comments from council?
thank you.
Thank you.
One other comment while we're on infrastructure, because I don't think I've announced this to council either, but it appears that we're also going to get the DNR trail grant that we put in for and didn't get last time, which will include the expansion, the second expansion, I think, of the river trail, which will go up Albion Street to, or to Austin Avenue and out to the west end of town. So that's being worked on as well.
Good news. Thank you.
I can't take credit for it.
Okay, so as far the water and sewer, we know there's some things coming before council for us to consider in order to be in compliance with the SAW grant. The streets and sidewalks, I don't know what you all discussed last time.
There really wasn't. It was just put on the agenda.
It was
to
just put
discuss.
on
So, and
Okay.
Tom might be able to come up and talk about our current street millage a little bit and what we have and when it's up and.
Hello again. I'm not quite as prepared with numbers on the street millage, but a couple comments on that, I guess. That was a 5-year, the current millage, the 3 mills, was a 5-year, when we went to the ballot, it was for 5 years versus recreation was 3. So technically, we've got a couple more years if we keep it at the 3 mills. Now, the problem with the street, and I don't want to dishearten everybody on this, but here's the issue with streets is on the 3 mills, I was just going to do the math here. We bring in probably somewhere in the neighborhood 170,000 or so a year. I was going to just ask Jim, that stretch from Irwin, on Irwin Ave, how long is that? Do you know, mile? Half mile?
It's close to a mile. It's 28-mile road to 27-mile road.
Well,
so
the stretch that they're doing with this grant, the ICE grant.
that's the whole.
Right, but do you know the length, the mileage?
It's about a mile because
So-
Eaton Street is 28-mile road and it goes to 27-mile road. So
Okay, that's what I was wondering. So 2.2 million is what they're estimating for 1 mile street. Now granted, that covers sewer and water underneath there. I don't know without sewer and water underneath it, maybe $1 million.
yeah, generally the statement is $1 million a mile for a road.
Right. So when we bring in 170,000 a year with 3 mills, and there's 36 miles of streets in
55.
Albion?
Closer to 50 one way.
50.
Yeah.
You know how many years? 50. That's $50 million. And 170,000 a year that we get in to try to cover $50 million worth of repairs or resurfacing. So it's challenging. And then the other thing too, a lot of people may have heard 2 months ago or so, there was a lot of hoopla coming out of the state about all the special money that Governor Snyder had allocated to municipalities, counties, cities to cover street repair. I think the figure was 70 million, if I remember. And we're making, really hit the newspaper, wow, $70 million, that's a lot of money. We got our share of that, it was 68,000. So that will not do a block, basically. and I, when they talk $70 million going out, Detroit, Grand Rapids, they're getting the bulk of it. When it comes to us, it's a pretty small piece.
Well,
So-
on a 3-year rotation, I think it's a 3-year rotation, we do major streets, which Erie was the last one that we did. And if I recall right, generally the state picks up what's the numbers on that? We pay like 200,000 of it, and then
As I remember, it's an 80-20 split or something to that effect,
right.
depending upon who funds it.
Okay. Do you remember what the numbers were at all for Erie?
I do not.
I was trying to remember, but I was just trying to give an example.
100,000 rings a bell.
Yeah.
That portion of area that we did.
Right. And I was thinking we paid about 200, which would be like
Right.
6 for
Right.
the 80-20 split. So, I mean, that's kind of what you're looking for, that stretch of road from Albion Street to the city limits there that they did, just to give you an idea of what we're spending on those type of streets and the share that we have to do on those as well. So,
One thing I would like to add that I overlooked earlier was, if in fact we do end up with this ICE grant, if you recall, in 2019, we are in line for a small urban grant for $375,000. If in fact we end up with the $2 million, we are hoping we can take that money and put it into a different street. Now, it has to be a qualifying street. It's basically a federal travel way. But we're looking at that as well. So 2019 might be a really good street year for us.
We hope so.
if you count a mile and a half of 55 miles.
We'll take it at
Right.
this point. Councilmember French?
Thank you. I would like to be able to think about, again, perhaps bringing this to the vote to make it not 3, but 5, or 7, or 10, so that we can, well, I think the reality is that if a road lasts 15 years, if you're just resurfacing it, the math is depressing as hell. It's 35 years to replace all the roads, and a road lasts 15 years, which means you're losing ground every year.
Exactly.
Yep.
And I think we as a city, if we can do it, we should at least, again, it's about educating our public about what they want. One of the things that I hear about constantly from everybody everywhere in this city, and everywhere and everybody in the state, is that the roads are in horrible shape. So who's going to pay for that? If the state gives us money, that's coming out of our taxes. If we're paying for it, it's coming out of our taxes. And if we charge taxes or property taxes or what have you in Albion, then we know the money that we're paying is going to our street and not Grand Rapids streets or Detroit streets or Lansing streets or Traverse City streets. They're staying here. And so I like the idea of being able to articulate to our citizens that we would like to be able to make our town have better streets. And the way you do that is you pay for it. And not count on the vagaries of the state government or the feds to help us with that. When they happen, it's great. 2019 is going to be a great year. We're going to get a lot of outside money. What happens in 2020? Nothing, right? And so you get this up and down. And so 10 is probably too much.
Well, and I think that's
5
where,
might not be bad.
right. I think that's where we need to set these goals out. So if we're looking at money for 2020, do we look at grant, or do we look at millages for next year, or parts of that next year, and then go forward from there?
So I have a question. With the major street repairs, is there already a plan in place on how to decide which major street is next on the list?
As part of the GIS system, I'm hoping to create a layer that we can basically layer in. There's a Pazer system, they call it, and it's basically a street rating system based on the age of the street, the condition of the street, so you can begin to then establish a hierarchy on which ones are the worst. And my hope is to get that layered into the GIS system so that we can go in there and go, wow, this is our worst streets right here. These are the ones we need to look at. Now, then to do it correctly, as I said earlier, let's look at also sewer and water there. How old's the sewer and water there? If it's really old, obviously, we need to take care of it. That's my hope. Currently, it's a matter of me basically going out, taking a look at things, citizens' complaints, comments from council, those types of things.
And then
I
with
have
this,
tried to bounce them around into different precincts, but basically that's how we're doing it currently.
And when you say major streets, could you give us a few of those?
I'm sorry?
Major streets, because I'm thinking my street is probably not a major street.
no.
Major streets basically are the M99, 994,
Right.
Business Loop, our major connectors, the bigger streets that run basically the full length of the city,
Right.
north, south, east, and west. Those are our majors. Then it breaks down to minors and then arterials.
So when do we get to the minors is what I'm asking.
When we decide.
Right.
So we need to have a discussion.
Well, and what we've been doing with the minor streets are those are the ones that occur between, every 3 years we get the small, what is it?
Small urban.
Small urban grant. And so that's the year that we do the major streets. And then in between, we've been doing these smaller streets, like we did Cooper Street, we did Darrow and Elizabeth, no, not Darrow, Darrow and Brockway.
Right.
And so we've been doing those on those in-between years.
So I guess and this will probably be my final question, maybe not. Do we have a plan in place that says over the next 3 or 5 years, these are the streets that we're focusing on, this is how much we need to make it happen, and this is how we're looking to make it happen?
We do
And
not.
I mean major and minor.
We do not.
That's probably something we want to
I would agree.
do.
I would wholeheartedly agree, and I think to establish that, we need to get that PASER system incorporated into the GIS so we have the big picture we can look at.
Okay, Councilmember French.
One of the things that Lauren Freeman worked on with John, and Andrew Freund, Vista member, worked with the Calhoun County Land Bank Authority, is creating a GIS system. And what Lauren has been able to do is work with the college. They offer a class in GIS systems and making the evaluation of things a priority as an assignment in the class. So we can have an army of 25 kids, college students, every year with the appropriate devices going through the city and surveying and working with you and with John to identify those problem areas. And so I think that if we are intentional over the next 12 to 18 months, that will happen.
I'll agree with that. And they've
Once we
already,
get the layers established, then it's a matter of updating, not creating. And I think that's the difference.
exactly, and the students you speak of are already beginning to do all the signs in town. Most of the major streets have had the signage already done on them, and it's already plotted in a layer in the map. So we're working on it, just takes time.
Councilmember Spicer?
Thank you. I was just going to comment that I don't need a GIS class to tell you what streets on
Need
the
to be
surface
done.
need to be redone. I don't know what's happening underneath, but I'm assuming the top is a mess, the bottom probably is also or will soon be. So that was just my comment. But yeah, I think excellent idea to get a list of where we want to go from here to there with regard to our streets, because they are in awful shape. I go around town and it's just, I could name off 10 right away, but we'll do that. I'm sure you could too.
And as part of that decision-making process, the SAW grant provided us with an asset inventory, if you will, what our current sanitary sewer system looks like out there. And there's some bad spots that need attention. So let's couple that and use that information when we begin to do our streets. So, you know, the street may be kind of bad, may not be the worst one in town, but kind of bad. But you may have sanitary sewer underneath that's potentially going to collapse on you, and you're going to have a major problem. So, I mean, those are the kinds of tools that were now becoming available to us so we can make more informed decisions on those kinds of things.
Councilmember Reed, did you have your hand up?
I was just gonna say, thank you, Mayor.
Go ahead.
That when we start doing that, we also need to look at places that we don't always usually travel, because those people pay taxes too. And I've been out towards the Kalamazoo River area. Some of those streets out there are terrible. I've been just all over town, you know. And they're usually the ones that don't get looked at, because a lot of people there's no stores out there or businesses, but still, they pay taxes, you know, so we need
Correct.
to take, really just drive every street to find out what it looks like.
She's not, she's sick. Can you go check on council member? Sure. So I think as a council goal, maybe we could, I mean, when I suggest doing a 3 to 5 year plan, I think we address the needs and then we can figure out how to fund it. We can determine if we need millages. I think people will support a millage if they can see where their money is going to benefit them and they can really see it. So I'm hoping council will agree to putting together a plan for streets over the next 3 to 5 years, and hopefully we could, hopefully this is something we can do as meaning the plan, 3 to 5 year plan, by 2019, I'm thinking, since that's gonna be such a good year for streets for us. We'll come up with the plan. Yes, Councilmember.
Thank you. I agree with you in principle. My concern about actually identifying which streets you're going to work on is going to work against any vote. Because if the next 5 years where I'm going to be paying taxes and my street isn't going to get done, I'm not going to vote for the millage. And so I think that's the concern. I mean, I think it's a good idea to have a plan and to identify. I mean, I think previous administrations early in my tenure, Maurice can remember when we had Kevin Markovich is our, she's ill. When Kevin was here, he would give us a top 10 list of streets that really need attention, and we would choose, and we would go from precinct to precinct. So, and the water bottle. She's ill.
Yeah, I know.
So I think that it's a good idea to have a plan, to identify those. I don't know how we...
I agree. I understand what you're saying. I agree with you to a certain extent. What it's good to have a plan, because when, like you said, we do this major streets every so often, but people don't know what street's next, right? And even with the minor streets, I don't know what minor streets are next for repair. But I think when you have it laid out, then people know what to expect. And I understand your point about the millages, and I agree with you. But I think it's better to have things laid out so people know what's coming or know what's to come, rather than not have a clue. So.
And I think the one thing you could emphasize with the streets as well is that your street may not need to be fixed right now, but if we don't fix these bad streets now, when your street does need it, it's not going to get fixed because you're going to be so far down the list, it's not going to matter. So,
Yes.
I just wanted to add, going back a little bit, a comment Jim made to give you an idea. I say here and listen, I feel kind of bad that we don't have some magical solution. I mean, it's a tough, I mean, the whole state is dealing with this. One thing, though, we looked at or are starting to consider, if you remember from a presentation, it's been a few months back when police came in and showed us when they did their sewer examinations with the cameras and everything, and they identified those bad spots, the potential collapses that could happen and stuff. One thing we started talking with Mickey Bidner about is if we may be able to use that to our advantage even with the streets, because if you have a sewer under the street and the sewer is going bad, your grant the available grant funding for streets is somewhat limited. But if you could get some funding, say, look, we got a potentially dangerous sewer system here. If we could get grant money to fix that sewer that definitely needs to be fixed, well, how do you fix the sewer? You got to tear up the street. So sometimes you can justify redoing the street by fixing the sewer underneath. So it's kind of how you sell it when you're applying for the grant. So just to give you, I mean, it's not like we're not trying to think of things, you know, we're looking at all angles, so just something to throw out.
And that's really what that ice grant is for Irwin Avenue, is to replace the water and pipes below it, so it,
And you end up getting a new street.
right.
So we're looking at that stuff, but.
Any other questions or comments from council? Thank you. So do we need to discuss sidewalks? We need to figure out what we're gonna do.
Well, and our current ordinance requires the homeowners to replace their sidewalks as they need to be replaced. We did the assessment in order for the city to fix a lot of those sidewalks, and we did fix a lot of sidewalk. Obviously, we didn't get to every single sidewalk with that money. And so then I guess the council needs to decide whether or not we're going to look at more assessments of some sort and or go back to what the ordinance actually says and require homeowners to take care of their own sidewalks.
I have a few comments and I'm trying to. Councilmember French.
You're welcome. Yeah, I think that it's gonna be a tough sell to do a millage on top of a millage.
Mm-hmm.
That said, what's gonna happen when we take our code enforcement officers out onto the streets and the sidewalks and start assessing repair bills to people who have not been assessed for how many years that we've had this special assessment? You
10.
know, decade? 10 years? So that's a concern. And so I think that one of the things that we have to figure out, again, maybe it's effective communication, and maybe it's a policy within the code enforcement office that it's not a 30-day remedy, but you got a year or whatever, because you know, I've had sidewalks replaced in front of my house just because I redid my front patio. They discovered some damage, and I paid $900 for 20 feet of sidewalk.
Mm-hmm.
And there are not a lot of families in town who can afford it. Oh, surprise! You got to find $900 to replace a sidewalk in front of your house. So that scares me a little bit. So, you know, I don't know what the solution is, right? I mean, that's why the $50 assessment was so good. Because everybody paid it, and those that didn't have sidewalks didn't have to pay it if they came in, and now it's not really the right thing to do, so I don't know what the answer is.
So everyone who paid that $50 assessment didn't get their sidewalk fixed?
Well, I mean, to give an example, my house, my sidewalks are fine. There's nothing wrong with them. So I've paid the assessment over these years, and I've never had my sidewalk fixed because there's nothing wrong with it.
Me either.
But some people, they do have some.
Right, and they weren't fixed.
And they weren't
right.
fixed, right.
But I mean, there's only so much money, and you either keep the assessment going along enough to fix every sidewalk, or you are where we are today.
Councilmember Spicer.
Well, and I was just going to say, I don't know how that wording was with regard to the sidewalk fee, but I would be pissed if I had paid the $50 for 10 years and my sidewalk didn't get fixed, but you're gonna come now and tell me, ticket me and say you needed it. So I don't know, I think that's some concern, and depending on how it was language, you know, the city could be liable because I'm gonna sue you for my money back. You didn't fix my sidewalk. I don't know how that happens. I mean, no, I'm just saying we need to be careful in that regard.
Councilmember Barnes.
When are we gonna start governing by the charter? The charter has an ordinance that says the citizens are responsible for the sidewalk. They're responsible, unless we go back in the charter, take a vote of the public, and remove it. When I lived in Grand Rapids, I had to take out $1,600 worth of sidewalk. Or they're gonna come and do it themselves and put it on my taxes. It's cut and dry, you follow the law as it is written. The emotions are real that you're sharing, but if we're gonna govern, we gotta govern.
Well, and that was one of the things I was going to say as well, is that maybe that's something that we need to look into, is changing that ordinance to be written in a way that would be more beneficial to everybody. Maybe it's a 50-50 split with the city if your sidewalk has to be fixed, or something along those lines, rather than just a complete fix your sidewalk. And so.
Do we have funding for that? So my question was, do we have funding for that? We don't. Well, it's definitely something we need to address. I don't know what the answer is either.
Right, so, it's, Councilman Barnes, I understand your frustration, because that's part of where I'm standing. I also like what I hear from our city manager about, a cost share. But we have never supplemented that $50, so any money we
No.
collected from that, that's the only
Correct.
thing we had for sidewalks, so.
I have a question for you. How many feet was that for $900?
It was a double wide, it's in the front of my house, plus part of the side, so it was probably 15 or 20 feet.
Well, you take that and you think about that, and the average sidewalk frontage on a home,
It's 40.
you take 8 years at $50, that's $400.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that they ever set the program up to redo
Right.
everybody's sidewalk.
They didn't.
Right.
They didn't.
And-
No, it was done to fix the sidewalks that we felt needed to be fixed, not necessarily every sidewalk, such as mine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not going to be fixed, so, but.
Just a thought.
Right.
Any, Councilmember French?
Sorry, actually, she should go, because
Oh, I'm sorry. Councilmember Spicer, I didn't see your hand.
Well, I was just going to say thank you. I don't know how we fix it, but I do know that there's to be some solution and that we have to consider how we approach this and the citizens. I mean, I know you're going to be livid at us because, on one hand, we charge them $50 and then now we say, follow this. So we just, I think the cost sharing sounds good, but I don't know if we can do that. So we just need to consider all ideas and vote and proceed from there. Thank you.
Councilmember French?
So just a quick follow, maybe this is for Tom, but $500,000 is $50,000, $100,000?
As to what it would generate,
Yeah,
$500,000 would be, well, I think we saw in the rec stuff, we were looking at about 43,000
yeah,
or so,
yeah.
and that's before capture.
Right, and so if, sorry, I'm just gonna continue.
No, go ahead.
It's fine. And when we charge $50 a head or a house, how much does that generate?
We were bringing in about a ballpark around 150,000 a year. What ended up happening is we started bringing in more early on, and for some reason, I guess it's typical in the real estate industry that when a property is sold or purchased, however you want to look at it, that if there are special assessments, they pay them up front. We didn't anticipate that, but all of a sudden, every time there was a house sell, the title companies would call and say, "What's the payoff?" So we had to start keeping track of the ones that paid the, if we were 3 years into it, they'd pay the remaining 7 years all up front. So over time, that amount that we collected kind of declined, and towards the end it was probably down to 140-something thousand a year, but originally it's maybe 160 or so.
So $1 million is what we're looking at.
And we had a lot of abandoned houses come up on that time too, so,
Yeah. Okay.
Any other council member comments or questions? Councilmember French?
So maybe there's some sort of middle ground. We can, again, if we do a sidewalk evaluation, what are the trouble spots that we can identify in our city? The ones that are, 2-inch gap, 4-inch gap over roots and trees. The ones that we know, what's that like? Can we identify those owners and work out, again, like you were saying, Mayor Brown, that
Mayor Pro Tem.
we're going to do a 3-year, 5-year plan. Well, you are.
Mayor Pro Tem.
You were sort of. But if we go to the public and we say these 10 miles of sidewalks are in critical need of replacement and repair, and we work with the owners of those properties where those sidewalks are difficult. And we work with them and maybe do a share. And at the same time, we do a special assessment on our property taxes of a mill or a half. A mill gets us 100,000 ballpark, right? And then we have the resources, we have a plan that we can sell to the public, and it moves forward, and we're not, taking an owner who's lived in their house for 35 years and getting socked with a $600, $900 assessment.
It's a good idea.
The other option you have coming up too is neighborhood planning councils.
That's right.
Yeah.
Where you can go to these neighborhoods and ask them their opinions on a lot of these things and see what they're interested in and explain the situations and the reasoning and,
Yeah, that's that communication.
yeah, right.
Yes, Councilmember Barnes.
Regardless of how you put this package together, it's going to come out to the public as the $50 sidewalk assessment came. People felt because they were informed to pay $50 for their sidewalk, that means that they had no more responsibility towards their sidewalk. To this very day, I get complaints from senior citizens precinct 1 about their $50 on their sidewalks. However, it wasn't meant to do every inch of every sidewalk in Albion. It was to put some money together where they could get to critical sidewalks, et cetera, et cetera. What you're doing now is in reverse, the same thing. You're going to select certain people who you feel need their sidewalks done. And then as soon as you start doing them, some of them are going to complain, and the people that are not getting them done are going to complain also. So why not just follow what's on the books by ordinance, by law, unless you as a council decide to change that period? To me, you're making a problem for yourselves emotionally and at the ballot box. Our city manager, through his staff or himself, you can look at how the other cities are handling it. It was no problem to me to come up with $1,600 because my sidewalks were identified. They were adamant that if you don't fix them, we're going to fix them. We're going to tax them to your taxes. Your property tax. Simple, simplistic to me. If we're going to govern, we should govern.
I'm just wondering,
So, Councilmember Reed?
is all of this going to come out to people in 1 year? You're gonna have a street tax, you're gonna have water.
We can have a meeting now, let's go.
Yeah.
Let's have a meeting.
Okay, all the increases that we've been discussing are
falling
going
fast.
to come out
We gotta vote on that.
in 1 year to people, because if they are, that's not gonna be nice.
Councilmember French?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you.
I hear that. So maybe it's something we do in 2019, 2020, and we follow Councilman Barnes' idea for the first year. And we figure out what that means. What will code enforcement? And maybe we work toward changing the charter or, but I think this probably needs a little more conversation.
I think so too.
And so,
Community.
yeah, with the community.
Yes.
Maybe it's the first thing that neighborhood planning councils tackle this summer,
Absolutely.
and we can find some solutions. Not
Lauren?
that I want to kick the can down the road, but
Well,
Lauren,
No, but
do you
sometimes,
know if that's an ordinance or, I think that's an ordinance that we can change, not a charter amendment.
all right, I bet you're right.
Yeah.
74-57, it looks like.
Yeah, it's an ordinance, so that's something that can be changed simply by what the council vote, so.
okay. Any other comments or?
If-
Yes.
A couple thoughts on this, in a couple different areas. Number one, I guess, if we choose to come back with some type of, whether it be to try to find some funding to do the cost share or whatever, I guess one thing I would hope that we consider, and I know Colin has stressed this adamantly, is I don't think we want to do a citywide flat assessment like we did before.
Right.
I think if we want to do citywide, we should probably put it on a ballot, let the voters choose, you know, if they want it or if they don't want it. If we want to do an assessment, I hope we would look at maybe a traditional assessment where you pick a particular street or, you know, an area that where the sidewalks are bad, and it would be just those property owners that are assessed the additional cost. Now, the other thought I had too is under our when we receive our Act 51 money, there is a portion of that we are supposed to spend on non-motorized. It's not a lot, but there is a little bit in there that has been building. In the past, we've satisfied that requirement by spending some of it on the trail, the bike trail, river trail and stuff. It's just a thought that if we wanted to consider something like maybe the 50-50 match or something, I mean, I think the first thing, like you said, is if you did an assessment to see how much, you know, what's out there, what's the cost going to look like. But, you know, there might be a little bit of money to do a match through that Act 51 money too. So just a thought.
And the other thing with homeowners, it may not be their whole sidewalk that has to be replaced. It might be a section or two, and so the cost would be minimal, especially for the city and the owner at the same time. So,
right.
So I guess moving forward, we need to, at some point soon, we're going to have to decide. But I think we've had good conversation. Yeah, but I think the neighborhood planning councils would be a great place to start. Start with this, and those are supposed to start meeting May.
and June,
Okay.
yep.
Okay.
I know Andrew's working on those, setting those up, and I think he said he had 4 places reserved already. So
Good. Okay. Any other comments or questions from council? Thank you. So let's go to the top. Neighborhood stabilization. we've this was brought up, but I don't know what specifically was. Councilmember French.
Thank you. As I recall, the neighborhood stabilization included things like the neighborhood planning councils and creating structures for the council and the city to receive feedback, to have programming that is intentional to bring the community together for dialogue. So whether it was something that the EDC does, the charrette, whether it's something that the city might do, or Michigan Works, or job fairs, or things like that that sort of get people talking. But I also think it included, I mean, I saw neighborhood stabilization as including not only the physical, street, sidewalks, sewer, water, whatever, electricity, but also the social, to get people talking to each other. Back in the day, we used to have, and we may still have in Albion, but I don't know of any, we used to have neighborhood watch groups. We used to have churches that would have community events, and many churches do those things. But to sort of find a way, and maybe that's the master calendar, that also provides ways for the community to know if you don't have Facebook, or if you don't have a computer, or if you don't buy the newspaper, you know, finding good ways of communication, that all brings the community together, that provides that stability. So I think it's all of those things. And I think for us as a council, are supporting neighborhood planning councils. I think Mayor Brown's idea of a master calendar does, you know, our city's Facebook, the weekly newsletter, all those communication things in a, you know, that is unified with all other communication forms, I think will help address that vague term of neighborhood stabilization.
Okay. Any other?
I think along with that comes the removal of blighted homes, as we've been doing. John, can you speak to anything new that's coming along? I know they've got plans through the land bank to take some more houses down. Do you know those numbers, or?
And as you're coming up, I also I understand there's plans to demo some houses, but I know there are some houses also in the city that are vacant and could probably be rehabbed. They don't necessarily need to be demolished. Are there any discussions with like MISTA or?
I actually had a discussion with Habitat for Humanity the other day, and they're looking for some houses in Albion to redo.
Okay.
Maybe not this year, and they're not. The problem they tend to run into is they get these. People want to do these giant houses. Well, they can't do that. They do small houses. So, in looking at that, maybe some small houses in town too that the land bank may have that we could look at for that purpose too.
Okay, go ahead.
John Tracy, Director of Planning, Building, and Code. Right now, there are 10 houses slated to come down in the next month or 2 months. They've already had the assessment done on hazardous materials, and most of them already have had the hazardous materials removed. So I know that the county has will be receiving a nice size amount to do more work in the county here. I'm not going to say the total amount. I've heard a couple different variations, but it appears that they will probably be doing more than just the 10 this year. We may be looking at another 10 or maybe another 20, all depending on how the money that they receive split up and spent. And as far as some of the homes that the Treasurer's Office has received back on foreclosure and gone to the land bank, they have tried to sell some of them that they felt could be rehabbed. Unfortunately, on some of the homes that they've had for sale, the longer a house sits, or even a year can make quite a bit of difference in deterioration if you have a leaky roof or such. One of the houses, for example, is 601 North Clinton Street. They had tried selling it, they did not sell it, and it's at the point where all of a sudden the roof's starting to fall in on the back of it, so it's going to wind up being demoed. So it would be great to see all the houses rehabbed, but the bottom line is sometimes it costs more than what is feasible for a person to invest into it. So, but yeah, and as far as Chief Kip had mentioned about Habitat, they have been talking about doing work on houses here, and hopefully they get straightened around where they can help out and do some of the homes. So the land bank undoubtedly is looking at any way they can come up with to save homes instead of having to tear them down. But you got to find a buyer.
And I understand sometimes you just have to tear them down.
And sometimes, yeah. And like I said, when they say a house sits vacant without any heat, it really starts to deteriorate quicker than what people would think. So.
Well, and it is nice to see some new homes being built in town as well. The one on Cass Street that's being built right now, and I know there's plans for a second house on Cass Street to be built as well. So the hope would be that we get rid of some of these blighted homes, which gives those lots available and people get interest in building new homes.
So the 10 demos that are coming up, you probably don't have it tonight, but at some point could we get a list of those?
Sure, I can send a list to you.
Okay.
No problem. And there's what the rewrite of the zoning and such, and I know my office has been approached by a few different individuals or developers and such too, that we may see things changing a little bit more than we suspect that typically it would for the good. So we've had people interested in senior housing. We also have an individual that's going to be forwarding a plan to me to bring in front of council and planning commission, dealing with a little bit different type of housing. But there's a lot of things happening out there. So hopefully we can keep moving in a good direction.
Thank you. Any council member questions, comments? Thank you. So I like the way Councilmember French kind of tied in the master calendar and the, so we can get through these. So the only thing left is, we just talked about housing. The vision, and I know that Mayor Brown noted on here that this should start with the neighborhood planning councils. That'll be starting to meet, but I'll just read it. What type of community are we planning for and utilizing resources to achieve these goals? And that's one of the things that we plan to start with the neighborhood planning councils to get the community's input on. So is there anything else from council?
I thought we were gonna kind of number these as to how we.
As far as prioritizing?
Yeah.
We may need to schedule another meeting for that, which we can do probably. I hate to do it with the, I don't know, Mayor Brown's availability. So.
We could probably wait till the next council meeting to make a decision.
But we definitely need to schedule one last and final, hopefully, council goal setting session. But is there anything else that, Councilmember French?
Thank you. I wasn't sure, this is kind of directed at Scott. The new water tower, are we asking to make a decision about when or how, or do you know what that was?
Jim probably has a better answer than I do on that, but.
Sorry,
You're fine, you're fine.
The proposal for the new tower is not just a new tower. It's part of the USDA rural development loan/grant application that we are going to submit. There will be extensive amount of water main work done as well, and probably some upgrading at the water treatment facility. Some of the SCADA systems, some of our operational controls, and those types of things as well. As I say, we're in the final stages of having that complete package ready to be submitted to the USDA. So that's where we're at.
Thank you.
You bet.
Any other comments from council? Interim City Manager? Entertain a motion to adjourn. Oh, I'm sorry, never mind. I gotta follow the agenda. I'm not used to doing this. Okay. Public comments. Do we have any public comments? Persons addressing the city council shall limit their comments to no more than 3 minutes. Proper decorum is required.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Just a real minor item I wanted to clarify. Earlier tonight, I think I said on the 3 mills from the street millage, I think I said that brings in about $150,000 a year, and I was looking at my math. I was wrong. I misspoke. It's $250, about $250,000 a year. I just wanted to clarify that. Still, it's a long way from $50 million to. But I just wanted to clarify it.
Thank you. Yes.
I know we discussed having Attorney Scott Smith here next week, I think it was.
Yes.
But with Mayor Brown being out, I'm not sure anybody's contacted him.
I didn't even know.
I thought Mayor Brown was the one that was going to contact him, so I don't know.
We picked those dates at the last council meeting.
Yeah, either
Two
Tuesday or Thursday
tentative
next week.
Dates next week. But I will ask Mayor to call you at his earliest
Okay.
convenience, or either I'll relay it
Yeah,
to you, okay?
yeah, if he wants me to contact him, that's fine.
Okay,
I don't know if I have his contact information, but I'm sure I can find it somewhere.
we'll figure it out. Okay.
All right, I just want to make
Okay.
sure that was being taken
Yes,
care of.
I'm
so-
glad you said something, because I didn't know how that was, but I'll get back with you. Okay, now I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Support.
It's been moved and supported. All in favor say aye.
Aye. Dang it. There you go.
I survived a whole